Welcome everyone to the channel this evening. We are gathered here to discuss a very important series within the booktube community, Sun Eater by Christopher Ruocchio. We're going to be starting with Empire of Silence. And I would like to first, I'm going to switch things up a little bit. First, we're going to introduce the players on the stage. And then I'm going to read you a quote from the very beginning of the book. No spoilers, no context. And then we will have our overview of spoiler-free thoughts for those of you in the chat who have not read the book yet. And after that, we will give you a warning so that if you don't want to know what happens in the book, you don't have to. And then we will go full spoilers and discuss all of the different categories of how we felt, what we thought, and if we survived. So I'm going to start to my right.
Hello, my name is Kayla, the Scholiast, and I have feelings and thoughts about this book that we will probably talk about, probably
Most
ramble
excellent.
about, you know.
Yeah, what's booktube without a good ramble, honestly? And then below Kayla.
Hello, I am Lord Nico Solarian, the one who read the book and ate the book. Once, long ago, I listened also to the audiobook.
Fantastic. And last, but certainly not the least of his fellows. You are muted, my friend.
Oh.
I am Andrew the Deathless Meredith. Mega fan now of Ruocchio. Having listened to the book, I have purchased the books, and I shall continue to be a fan until my dying days, which is never.
Chef. Andrew, has anyone ever told you should do audiobook narration?
No, not once.
Okay, you should look into that. I think you'd be good at it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So for everybody in the chat, welcome. If you have read the book, you will understand the opening probably a little bit more. It was very much in the spirit of Sun Eater. And we did a read along over on my Discord this last month. Well, no, it was in May. It was in May when we read Empire of Silence. And we are now gathered to talk about it and discuss how we felt, because this has been a series on my radar for the last probably 2 years. And I know that it has exploded all over BookTube this last couple of years. It's been talked about all over the place. It's come back. There you go. Perfect. Yeah. It's hard for me to be that serious, Palmer. So I'm glad that it worked. The acting skills are still coming in clutch over here. And to answer your question, we will definitely give you a warning when we move into spoilers territory. We're going to do general overview thoughts and maybe who we would recommend this book to, maybe as well in general. So let's start with, you know what? We didn't introduce you.
I mean, I wasn't going to say anything. I was like, they probably already know me. It's fine.
We're just basically the same person, so I always forget to do that. Apologies.
I am Ben Gibson, also mentor to 3 tiny dramatic humans. So very, very close.
Yeah.
Yep.
There was a kinship there.
There was a kinship there. I felt that identified.
Nice.
Yep.
Tori the half-mortal just treating Ben like a homunculus.
Right? I know. We are not the same.
Not really a person. Yeah.
There's going to be so many inside jokes in the stream. I can't wait. Yes. So I'm going to read a quote. And it's not a very long quote. And I promise there's no spoiler context. It's like literally in chapter 5, which is this far into the book. No context. But I wanted to read it to kind of set the stage because it's a great quote. A wise man once told me that flesh was the cheapest resource in the human universe, and that life spends more easily than gold. I laughed when I heard that and denied him. I was a fool to do so. How little I knew. And I feel like that just that was the quote that as I was looking back through my tabs just kind of encapsulated a lot of the tone of what I've read of this series so far. And I think, yeah, for lots of reasons. But So let's start with Palmer says everyone knows who you are. So despite my faux pas.
It's all good.
Say hello to everybody in the chat. I will be making sure, I can't remember if I did or not, I will make sure that everyone's channels are linked down in the description box momentarily while everyone is sharing their thoughts. So be sure to give them a subscribe as soon as I do that. M Branch says, hi, everyone. I just finished book 3 in the series. It just gets better. Awesome. I'm going to switch this. There we go. Now I can read it.
Yeah, that looks a lot better. It was weird.
That was a lot better. I don't know what was happening there. Amateur reader, finished this not too long ago. Very curious what you guys have to say. And feel free, chat, to chime in, to offer your opinions, to let us know what you thought as well, because chances are one of us agreed with you.
Keep it spoiler free for the rest of the chat for now.
Yes. Ben is...
Oh.
This keeps coming up for some reason.
Thank
you guys,
you're very kind.
I'm trying to get him to narrate audiobooks. We'll see.
There are a lot of really fun sentences in this book that just merit being read out loud. So
it's true.
Yes.
Bengus Khan's in the chat. This is one of the big, chunky, ambitious, ongoing series in trad. There are so few right now that are allowed to go past a trilogy. True. No thanks to his... Yeah. But he came back. He was... I'm trying to think if there's a name within Sun Eater that fits that. Deathless. There we go. That's the one I was looking for. Thankfully, because a lot of people have absolutely loved this series since that point, and that's awesome. So, all right, let's start. We're going to go around the circle, and we're going to just say our general overview thoughts of the book and maybe the type of readers we might recommend this to. Andrew, since you are our resident, longest time fan, rereader, expert.
Because I started in January, that counts, I guess.
It counts.
So, no, not January. It was before that. But I don't remember exactly why I started it. I'll try to keep this real short. But I read Dune before Dune came out. So I finally got around to Dune before the movie came out. And I was disappointed in the book and absolutely loved the movies. It was everything that I wanted the books to be that never was. And so when I kept hearing about Sun Eater and the fact that Ruocchio was trying to quote unquote fix Dune, which I think he probably actually succeeded in my opinion. I was like, okay, I guess I'll check this out. That's really audacious to be saying things like that because every young author, because when he wrote it, he was young, says they're going to do something like that. And it's just so... I won't insult any other authors, but there's authors I can think of who are like that. And
no shade.
Yeah, no shade on Aragon. So the fact is I went into it thinking, yeah, right. And I picked up the audiobook, which it turns out was really good when I started into it. I'm like, who is this audiobook narrator? And it's Sam Ruocchio, who plays Simcoe in Turn, Washington Spies on Netflix. It's one of the best villains I've ever seen in a show. So I was just blown away by the narration. And I think Ruocchio accomplished what he was set out to do. And I was just overwhelmed I was overwhelmed in the same way that the Dune movies overwhelmed me. That you just kind of sit there in the theater and are just awash with sensory overload the whole time. And so I buckled in and listened to the book and then immediately went into number 2 and listened to the whole of book 2. So I know there's places where we'll disagree on whether things lost their tension. I just wrote it so hard and so long that I never got off the wave. And so, and I'm still feeling overwhelmed halfway through book 4, but it's a good kind of overwhelming. So that's where I'm at. I would suggest it to those people who enjoy Dune. I would suggest it to people who read Dune and said, meh, it didn't meet up my expectations. Read this, especially if you read sci-fi, which I don't read a lot of sci-fi these days, but I was raised on a lot of sci-fi, which my other caveat will be that later when we talk about its episodic nature, why I was able to get into it so well. But if you were a little less impressed with Dune and you want something more on the scale of The Expanse, then this is going to be probably for you.
Nice. Lord Nico.
Hello. Yes. So I've been meaning to get to this series for a very long time because people kept telling me to check it out, and I'm always hesitant on like the really hyped books. This one though, I feel like was one of the rare ones where people were hyping it, but I also had several people give me the manage expectations with book one
Sure.
because I heard a lot about the references are really strong and there's a lot of things like that. And I know it's supposed to get better, and you have some definite quotes and stuff from Dune, your legally distinct energy swords, that definitely aren't lightsabers,
And the shields, yeah.
and the shields from Dune, and some of that kind of stuff. But the big thing people kept telling me too is that the prose would probably work well for me, and I found that it did. So I think this is one of those things that if you're not the type of reader that cares that much about seeing like influences or like things that feel that you've seen before, that kind of thing, I think this will work well. Ben in the chat, I think you will like this series for the record. If you've not read it, I can't remember if you actually have read it or not. I'm blanking now, but if not, I think you would. Yeah, I think it's kind of a mix for people who like if you think, I think the Dune thing, if you think Dune is too slow, this will probably work a little bit better for you. But also if you're the kind of reader who likes a little bit more modern, like you're okay with things like Red Rising that aren't necessarily the most original to start with, but have things going on, just throwing shade at Tori.
I have thoughts on that.
But I mean, you get a bit of you get a lot of Dune, you get a lot of Star Wars. I roll my eyes a little bit every time they set their phasers to stun. I mean, you get a lot of that in here, but
Yeah.
it's the flashes of world building and like where this is going, where this is really setting up for to be more of like a grand epic space opera from the feel of it.
Yeah.
That's what has me going.
Nice. Kayla.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and not repeat what you guys have said. So I similar to Nico, I had a bit of hesitancy going into this because of the hype train. I had bought in the book and I gave myself some time because that's the best thing I've learned for me when it comes to reading a book with a lot of hype is to just have it sit in the shelf for a little bit, give it some time before diving in, temper my expectations a bit based on the hype. I think overall, what really captured me was the character focus that it has, the world, the lore, the depth of all of that. And then, like Nico talked a little bit about with setting the stage for such an epic tale. I think a big part of, especially when you're looking at debut books or the first book in a series, being able to convey to the reader the large vision that you have in such a way that wants them coming back and is clear enough that they are understanding what they're going in for such a long series as well. Even if you don't understand, I'm sure Andrew's like, well, you have no idea what's going on. No, but I can have a little bit of a glimpse based on book one. And I think that that helped in the experience of it and trying to separate all of the hype and the word of mouth that went along with the book. In terms of, I know everyone's given references already, but I'm going to come from this with the perspective of a fantasy reader because I primarily read fantasy books. I do read sci-fi, but not as much. So for me, I would say if you're coming from fantasy and you love those slow burn books that are really character driven, that really delve into the complexities and the conflicts of the world, this is one that you might really enjoy. Keeping in mind that you're in for a while. These are like 600-page books, and there's 7, I think, is the plan for it.
Currently,
if you're that kind of fantasy reader, I think you'll be in for quite, I would say, a solid modern start to sci-fi.
You're furiously taking notes. Would you like to start?
Sure.
Okay.
I guess for me, It boils down to three things that I can say really held me in this book and propelled me through it. The prose and the world building concepts, and the characters and the character contrasts that exist between the characters. And to that end, like if you enjoyed like the way that characters in Arcane Season 1 will play like a slow game of chess across the story, like characters in Sun Eater do that, and it's fun to read. The world building concepts, like especially the type of thing where you have characters finding evidence that there was a much older, more mysterious civilization that existed way before any of theirs, that sort of undoes a lot of their previously understood history. I could read that kind of stuff all day. I love it because I want to know what the answer is, and I'm confident that Ruocchio has a really good answer in mind. And the prose is really good if you enjoy the sort of elevated language that you often find in Malazan. This first book has a lot of that kind of thing in here too. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. I will share my thoughts briefly, and then I know we've got some great comments in the chat that I want to pull up too. So I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of what Kayla said, in that as primarily an epic fantasy reader, this is a series that I would absolutely recommend for people who love epic fantasy and want to dip their toes into sci-fi and, you know, read something that has that more sci-fi futuristic kind of vibe, because it reads like an epic fantasy. It does, which is something I really appreciated about it, because it sci-fi is one of those things where I'm either really gonna enjoy it if it reads gives a little bit of that fantasy flavor, or bounce off of if it's really hard sci-fi and leaves the characters behind. And Ruocchio is very cognizant of his characters, even very early on in the story, regardless of whatever issues that I had with it, which we'll talk about later. I do think that what really made me enjoy this book the most was the big picture that was being painted in the background, because you can see it. Like, the vision is there in book one, and I saw the magnitude of it, and I don't know what's going to happen in the series, obviously, but that larger big vision that the author has is very clear and locked me in pretty fast once I kind of figured out what the larger conflict and storyline was going to entail. And that was the part of the book I think that I felt was the strongest. And Hadrian too, when you have a first person narrative in a book this large with this big of a scope, it takes a very strong character voice to pull that off, because you can write, a first person and have a shorter book, and usually that carries pretty well. You can get away with it, different kinds of characters a little bit easier. This is a framed narrative, and you kind of get those two sides of Hadrian right away, right? He's the older character telling us the history, and then we are in the moment with young Hadrian as the story's being told. And I think that is also a strength of this book for me, was that whether I liked Hadrian at every moment of this book, I 100% think that he's a strong enough character to hold a story this big over a series, which was impressive to me.
I think another strong comp based on that note too is Fitz.
Oh yeah,
but
very much
Fitz
so.
is not
Yeah.
smart.
Yep. Well, Hadrian isn't always either.
No, but you see Hadrian growing. And he gets smart because of the way that he's telling it, versus Fitz is still kind of juvenile even when he is older. And Hobb does a great job of writing juvenile and older at the same time. Yeah. But they're two totally different characters. It takes a strong hand to be able to pull off, like you say, that much first person.
Yeah. All right, I wanted to jump into the chat really quick because there were some comments. Benghis Khan says, right with you on Ruocchio outdoing his inspiration. I have not. So that is one thing I should mention in the general overview as well. I came into this completely fresh on any of the influences. So I have never read Dune. I've never seen the films. I have and all of the references that might have been within the story for that, I didn't catch which was kind of nice. And I'm okay with that. So I came into it not knowing any of his influences, which I don't know that would have made a huge difference, but that's where my
you would have rolled your eyes more.
Probably.
His blindness.
Just a bit, probably.
Dune really does lend itself to the visuals and sounds the movie allows. The soundtrack is amazing, just as a throw out of that. Benghis Khan says, LOL on being overwhelmed halfway into book 4. If you know, you know.
I know.
Now I'm getting FOMO because I'm only halfway through
right now.
M Branch says, I want a name. Volka, the voice of reason. Love Volka.
Yeah. Character contrast there.
See, this is going to be an interesting thing. Maybe we can touch on briefly too. It's weird how so many people go into book 1 without managed expectations. The hype from fans is about the whole series, not book 1 particularly. I feel like that's a very common series fandom thing, where, you know, the individual books kind of blur into the bigger experience once you get further in to a big series like that. Yeah, I don't know.
You know, when I had heard, I think it was probably Wizard who had mentioned book 2 is what will clinch the book. It will clinch the series for you. Yeah. And so I started reading book 1, and by the time I finished book 1, I'm like, if this is not as good as book 2, how much better can book 2 get? And you walk into book 2, which people are experiencing, like, I don't know. And then yes, you hit that moment where it's like, okay, Wiz, I get it. You're right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I enjoyed everything that book 1 did. But I was kind of managed and ready for, okay, we're going to be in for this long haul, even 2 books of 7.
I mean, I think if realizing that Ruocchio, like as a young author myself, realizing that Ruocchio wrote this specifically at 19.
That's impressive.
Right?
Overwhelms. That overwhelms me.
That's mind-blowing to me.
Yep.
And I think, you know, he's at that point, you're still finding yourself as a person, like much less as a writer. And I think there was definitely some finding his way going on in this book for sure. But I think knowing, again, like you said, that's where he's starting from. That's a pretty impressive debut for that age.
I think there were a lot of times where there was throwaway things or characters that in any other 19-year-old would have been wildly ham-fisted. And it wasn't, I wouldn't call it ham-fisted, maybe, you know, pork butt fisted than full ham.
Okay.
You know. But you know, it could have been a lot worse. And so I did grant a lot of forgiveness to the fact that he was such a young author, while I was sitting there jealously shaking my fist at him for being so good at that age. Because we all wanted that at 19.
Definitely.
Or thought we were that good. We were not.
Sun Eater is among my all-time faves from Benghis Khan. I understand like why people love this series so much, even from the first book. Don was reading along with us. I put it down 3 times and kept coming back. Once I got past about 30%, it was good for me. We are definitely going to dive into, I think, the different sections of the story in our spoiler chat. Referential joke late in the book that both made me snort, but also disappointed me for being so referential.
I want to know if it's the bonefish one.
Palmer has a question for us. I haven't read either. Should I start Sun Eater or Malazan first? Any opinions? Nico, how much of Malazan? Have you read any Malazan?
Oh yeah, I 10 years ago, but yeah.
Okay, but still,
it's been a while. I mean, they're quite different.
They are.
And I think it's just going to depend. In my head, I still remember Malazan not very fondly. like it's one of those series I appreciated, but I had no fun reading. It was
Mhm.
always like in retrospect where I'm like, that was really good, but while I was reading it, I hated it. So I had a weird reading experience.
That's
But
fair.
I read the first line for a video recently, and I'm like, man, I really need to reread this because I think I would appreciate it much more now in my life than I did 10 years ago. Um, but yeah, Malazan is doing something quite different, also on a really big scale with fantasy. And if you kind of really want to like dig in, very expansive. It's you're not following like the same characters or even the same location from book to book for a
Mhm.
while.
Mhm.
So if you want to just really go in off the deep end and just jump into a fantasy world and really go crazy and explore everything, everywhere, and everyone, it's a good one. Whereas at least so far, even though the scope's going to be really big, Sun Eater seems like it's a much more personal journey, character focused kind of book on a large scale.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think Palmer's read Janie, so that
Yeah, I
might be an
think
argument
so.
for Sun Eater. Now, I'm not saying that the same in scope of prose, but there's a if you're a prose fiend, that might be an argument for Sun Eater first.
I didn't read the word potsherds one time in this though, so
But those Eudoran plays, though.
Foreign plays.
Yeah.
that's a Malazan joke for those who didn't get that. But
Yeah. Steve Erickson likes his potsherds. Yeah, I mean, I think too, Malazan is very much like an open world game. Like there's, like Nico said, you're every possible nook and cranny you can explore. And I agree that Sun Eater is a much more like focused, it's got a single protagonist. So
In a single point of view.
and a single point of view, at least as far as I know through the whole series. Question mark, Andrew, as far as you've read ish.
Sorry, I was thinking about Janie for a second. What was the question?
I can relate to that one.
It's still single protagonist in book 4, right? It's just
Yeah.
still,
It's still Hadrian.
yeah. So I mean, I think that's one of maybe the biggest considerations is you've got one POV with Hadrian through the series versus Malazan, which is tons of POVs, and it's still like massive scope of world in both cases, but it's kind of how it's told, I think. Thoughts, Kayla? Because I know you've read Malazan.
Yeah, I would say it's basically the same. Just base it off of how in depth you want to go with your stories right now. Are you looking to jump off the deep end like Nico said, or are you looking for something a little bit more, focused? I think if you've just having read Palmer's books as well, I think she might enjoy Sun Eater more. Kind of like Nico was saying, he didn't really enjoy Malazan the first time, but I do think she would appreciate Malazan for what it is. So there's two different experiences, I think. And Palmer, I'm speaking for you. I'm sorry, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think just from reading your own writing and having read those two books so far, or the two series so far, I would say that would be my takeaway for you.
Do you have a thought on that?
I think that it would probably be better to start with Sun Eater, just because if you're going to start with, like, if you're going to read them, like, first this and then this, and you start with Erickson and then go to Ruocchio, like, it's because it's more condensed and more focused, it might seem a little underwhelming just because if you had your mind immersed in Erickson first. So I'd say start with Ruocchio first. And also, I think that there probably were potsherds, but the Quiet just know how to clean up after themselves.
That's a good point.
Well done, dear. Oh, man. For all the poor people in the chat or the replay who are like, I haven't read the book yet. What does that mean? Please go read Empire of Silence. Okay. Jeff McIntyre says, this is definitely more space opera than sci-fi. He's telling an epic fantasy hero's journey. Yeah, essentially. Very true. Yep. Preferred Empire of Silence to Gardens of the Moon.
Yeah, me too.
Hello, Mr. Roro. Welcome. It's the Firefly joke, Andrew, in reference to
I don't recall that. Yeah. I'll have to figure that one out. Tell me later.
I remember rolling my eyes at it, so I remember specifically reading it, but I can't think of what it was
I didn't
now.
catch it.
Yeah.
I didn't
The
catch
Lord of
it.
the Rings one he made was, he said something as limp as a boned fish, and it was like right out what Sharky says
There
in
was
or
another
one of the
in there
works
that
says.
I can't remember. I remember I did catch one that I was like, I see what you did there. I cannot
Yeah.
remember what it was
Which,
in
I mean,
reference to.
it's so
Can't remember what it
indie
was.
of him, because we indies are constantly referencing.
Oh yeah, Easter eggs everywhere.
Screw it.
Why
We're too
not?
small for anybody to care.
Hey, Britton, no, we've not moved to spoilers now yet, but we have been going for about half an hour, and those are our kind of, I would say, general overview thoughts. So if you are watching this and trying to gauge whether or not you think that Sun Eater is going to be for you, hopefully we've been helpful in that vein. And we are going to move to the spoiler section of this discussion now. So for those of you that asked for a warning, this is your warning. We are now moving to spoilers. So if you don't want to listen to spoilers for Sun Eater Empire of Silence by Christopher Ruocchio, now is the time to say your goodbyes, and thank you for joining us. Was that long enough? Was that good?
Very well done. Very well done.
Thank you. Okay, so we are moving to spoiler discussion. Thank you for joining us, Palmer. I hope whichever series you decide to start with, you enjoy. All right.
Jeff commented it, and I'm like, yes, I knew, I remembered seeing it at the time. I stopped keeping track though, because there were just many like references and things, and I was trying not to dwell on them.
So is that something, just out of curiosity before we get into spoilers here, that is like, if you see references to other books or films or whatever, does it bother you generally?
So I think it depends. It feels a little on the nose to an extent, and so I like it to be either a little bit more subtle or understated, or just not too much. I think it kind of depends, because like if you're going for like a comedy or something, totally different. Like if you're reading, since we were talking Erickson, if you're reading Willful Child, you know, that's basically starts as like a Star Trek parody and is parodying everything else, and it's making all kinds of jokes, you know, completely different. But I for me, it was, some of it just was, it was a bit much, but also it was like there were those like, this is a clear reference, and then there were other things that this is just like a part of the world that's completely from something else, and so that just got to me a little bit, where I'm just like, okay, yeah. You're explaining to me how the shields from Dune work, but I've read Dune, so I know how the shields from Dune work. You're explaining to me how a lightsaber works, but I've seen Star Wars, so I know how a lightsaber works.
Right.
You know, and so just some of that kind of stuff where I because and granted, so this is, you know, I'm not nearly as well read in sci-fi, but I feel like some of the stuff too is, you know, also like just fantasy or like movie tropes, so a little bit more, but it tends to just it'll start to irritate me a little bit if there's just too much that's too familiar. And that was my biggest complaint, is this book was extremely derivative in a lot of ways, but the unique stuff is also the stuff that was the most interesting to me. So, and that's kind of where it's balanced, because this wasn't just I'm delivering this. It was kind of felt like, yeah, I'm going to use all of these world elements from other stuff you've seen before, but here's the really cool thing I actually am planning to do. And there were enough flashes of that I'm like, okay, I'm actually really interested in what he is bringing to the table that's new. I'm a sucker for like ancient civilization, you know, kind of things. Like I love Stargate with that kind of premise, and that's something you get a lot in fantasy too, with like the older civilization. I love that trope. I am a sucker for that trope. So as soon as we introduce that, I'm just like, okay, suddenly I'm very intrigued. And so that really is something that just, I'm like, okay, I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I was warned about it. If I would have started this and had no idea, I probably would have DNF'd, to be honest. I might have if I wasn't doing the audio, but I did really like the narration. And so the parts that I didn't like, it kept me going. And then I got to the parts that I did like. And I'm like, okay, I'm very much bought in. I'm curious to see what book 2 does. So
I would have liked if he had done less quotes, like media quotes, and more modern literature as history, as he does, because he does such a great job of blending like the Siddharthan legend that he references, that he used Siddhartha and Arthur as this 10,000 years in the future, it's been combined as a single mythology. If he had done references to Tolkien as an important part of Earth's history since then, that would have been better for him with his pen stroke to have done that, I think, than quoted. Because then it would have been, of course, there's things that are written today that are part of the culture 10,000 years from now, if Siddhartha and Arthur are.
Yeah, that is another thing too. That is, I feel like that's overdone. I've seen it in both fantasy and sci-fi as well. But sci-fi a little bit more if it's taking place like in our world, but just because so much time has passed, but you're quoting like stuff that is relevant today, and like why aren't there any quotes from like the 10,000 years after today? Like it's all.
I've thought about that too.
I agree.
Like it includes some references to things that we are completely clueless about because they haven't happened yet.
Exactly. And so, and like you can, when you're kind of mixing it, I think, which some of that is, I can see that you're doing a little bit of both and everything. Like there are some references to like they're talking about just matter of fact, we had like there were dragons on Earth and like things like that. So like there are some things where they obviously don't know the real history, but it leans a little hard into that, which is also just a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. But it's not like a deal breaker, because also you think about it is, stuff that's really classic and really, stored and that you have now, it makes sense that you're still going to have records of that and know some about it. But that's a trope I feel like some sci-fi authors just rely on a little bit too much.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many fantasy authors who write books about dragons that I'm not surprised that in the future people just thought there were dragons on Earth. The fantasy community made sure of that. So what I kind of thought we would do to start with is go through some categories of different elements of the book and just kind of use those as general guidelines for bringing up what we liked and didn't like about each of those things, and whatever else we want to talk about. Feel free to go on a tangent if you feel like it. Mark, hello. I'm going to say hello to a couple new people that have joined us. Zin is here. So Zin, for anybody who's watching replay or in the chat, it has been the champion of Sun Eater for me for the last 2 years, trying to get me to read this series. So Zin, we're here. We made it. I told you I was going to read it. I'm fulfilling my promise. Late, but we're here. Jeff said, enjoyed the book. References didn't bother me too much. My one real complaint was that it really felt like it was 2 books with a very messy interlude between them. That's kind of sort of in my vein of thought. So we will definitely talk about that once we get to pacing and structure, which is one of the things that I have, because I know Andrew mentioned it being very episodic and wanting to talk about that a little bit too. So let's start with Hadrian as a protagonist, because I feel like, we start with Hadrian. We're in a framed narrative. He is our sole POV through the entire series. So I feel like he kind of deserves his own category at the beginning of this discussion. So yeah, Ben, would you like to say anything about Hadrian?
There are moments where he's such a poet, and he like the book even acknowledges, and all the characters around him acknowledge how dramatic he is sometimes. And sometimes it's even a little much for me, where he'll think about things so deeply, and I'm just like, Hadrian, we can move on. It's all right. But most of the time it didn't bother me that much.
Guys, if Ben gets to that point, it's a lot of reflecting.
I don't get it. And he has interesting reflections.
He does.
And I like that there are certain just character moments that really set the stage. Again, it's all the contrasts where Crispin goes off into the Colosso, but Hadrian turns away. And the growing distance that exists between himself and his father and himself and his brother, and how he's slowly realizing these things. And Gibson sort of just serves as the assistance or the assister to help him realize these things. Yeah, I like things like that, and I thought he was a really, again, like a powerful character to perceive this story through.
I read that exact line today, in fact. Like, has anyone ever told you you're a bit melodramatic? Yep, ask anyone who knows me. Like, that exact line today in book 2. So I'm just like, yeah.
There he goes.
Ask anyone who knows.
I'm actually going to piggyback off that briefly, because this is the one time in this discussion I'm going to mention Red Rising. The one time. Okay?
Yeah, right.
Someone take notes. We gotta hold her to this.
And I should have said this in my general overview.
So we're not allowed to bring it up after this, right?
No, you guys do whatever you want. I am choosing specifically to keep these series very separate because I think they both deserve it. And that's something that I have seen a lot in the community, where this series was pitched to me by quite a few people as the adult version of Red Rising, which I completely disagree with.
There's a Coliseum.
So different. There's
a Coliseum. There's
both.
2 of them.
And like, they're the only 2 books in the history of mankind that have ever featured a Coliseum. Yes. So that's why they're right.
Are you not entertained?
Not entertained. So the reason why I want to piggyback off of that is actually because in my head, I have done like a 45-minute dissertation on Darrow versus Hadrian as protagonists, because it's been recommended to me so much with those 2 together. And again, I want to say they're separate series, and I think they do very different things. They have very different tone and theme and style and everything like that. But one of the main differences, I think, is exactly what you just said. The idea of Crispin leaning toward the arena and Hadrian leaning away, right? Hadrian is not a born and bred soldier. He fights. He's not a soldier. That is not who he is internally, at least at this point in the story. I don't know what the future looks like. Darrow is. And the mentality, like, Hadrian is a philosopher. He's a poet. He's an anthropologist, right? He wants to know culture and all of that stuff, and he wants to learn about all those things. So I think that is one of the major differences in tone for me between the 2 series, and I wanted to bring that up, and then we're going to leave it alone. Because I think people shove these 2 series together too much. I do think that they each have their own space. So, moving along, you guys have full reign to kick me off the stream if I mention Red Rising again.
That's
and I'll take over.
Kayla can take over. In terms of Hadrian as a protagonist, I kind of said in my overview that, like, I think he carries the story really well. I don't like him all of the time, but I don't dislike him as a protagonist in terms of like what he's doing in the story and how he's utilized within the story. He does. I like that you mentioned Fitz a little bit ago, Andrew, because I do think, like, after a while, Fitz is an idiot, but he's our idiot, you know? And I do feel like Hadrian leans into that area more, where there were so many moments where I was just like, boy, but I didn't dislike him at a core level, which I thought was cool. And I have more thoughts, but I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let Kayla talk.
I'm just laughing at Zin in the comments. We've triggered something.
Oh my God. I'm not going to speak to that, Zin, because we will get into a fist fight because I disagree that it's better, that it's functionally better.
Red Rising.
Okay.
Oh.
Moving on.
Yeah. In terms of Hadrian's character, I didn't really like him.
That's fair.
Because to me, I'm going to try and explain this the best way I can. To me, he is believable for the type of character that he is. He's a young man who's been under the thumb of his parents because of the role he has for his entire life. He's had these expectations, and like you said, he's more of a thinker, more of a dreamer than his brother. And so he's at the stage of life where he's basically pushing back and pushing against the life that he was set up for, pushing against being used as a pawn, basically what he was born for, and trying to get some semblance of control to his life. And so for me, that part was really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's in his 20s at the start of this book. So, you know, for him to be that young, going through all of that, that makes me think of a, you know, a young, or like an older teen, a young adult finding their way in the world, breaking out from their parents' little like home and wanting to find their own identity, claim their own place in the world. But along with that, he's rash. He is book smart, yes, but he is not street smart. Boy does not think things through at all. Like he is like we talked about, he's melodramatic. So to me, he embodies pretty much what I would imagine a young man finding his own identity, his own place in the world, or in this case, worlds, because he, you know, goes off. But at the same time, part of me, I just didn't like his character for that reason, because I had such a hard time connecting with him. Completely believable, really well written. He ticked me off a lot.
That's fair.
Yeah.
For that reason. He became way more interesting to me as I continued on. I would say the last third of the book is when I was like, all right, I can see where this is going to get more interesting. And where his character is going to excel. And we also have that little snippet of his older self being the one telling the story. So that kind of gave me he's obviously, we don't stay young and naive forever. We don't always stay within our youthful personalities and traits, but there were some choices that boy made. The mom in me was like, why would you do that?
Yep.
You know, and so watching him make his mistakes because of that, the choices that he was making, and you know, the circumstances he was going through, all of that ended up becoming more and more fascinating to me as we went along. I would say I still don't like everything about him. I still think he's at that stage of his life where I'm just like, get your stuff together, please. A little bit more than you have. But he's so believable for an author to be able to write a character like that, where to me, it's a win when an author can make me like or dislike a character without breaking their integrity.
Yeah.
Right? That's a total win. If you can make me like them or hate them, and you can keep that integrity without, you know, sacrificing it for plot, for, oh, you know what, they need to be a little bit smarter for this scene. Absolutely. I think he did a really good job in that regard. So I'm curious to see if my opinion of Hadrian, if his likability will go up in the meter. Can we get like a meter going up? You know?
Being
Hadrian likability here, you know?
You know?
Yeah, but I am curious to see if the likability does change over time. But I do think he is very well written for his age and the circumstances that he's going through.
Well, I think it makes sense too from the point of view that also Christopher was in that like age group and sphere as he's writing Hadrian. So that probably lends itself to the believability, because he, in some ways, I'm sure, was writing some of what he knew.
Yes.
And that probably gave it some extra credit and authenticity.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Nico, how did you feel about Hadrian?
So my thoughts on this, as most things, are a little bit mixed. I will say my super thing about, because I did specifically, I was the first one to mention Red Rising, so that was my bad. I don't think they're particularly similar. More so just that Red Rising also uses a lot of familiar elements, things you've seen. It's a little bit dramatic and is first person. But very distinct. I think this sits very much in like the middle. If you put that on one side, Dune on the other, this is like in the middle with some elements of both. But so So Hadrian, I felt like there were definitely some moments, and somebody I can't remember if it was Esme, maybe, but somebody in the Discord chat commented on how it felt like at some points Ruocchio was still kind of figuring the character out, and some of that might be the character figuring himself out as well. And so I definitely felt that there were some moments that felt a little bit inconsistent. Hadrian definitely annoys me at points as well, and that's been written 100% exactly what you said. Where I'm like, all right, buddy, I get it. Like, come on, pipe down.
Yeah.
But also, I enjoyed some of the waxing poetic too. It's the kind of the narration style, which I think the narrator lends himself to very well. There's something about the voice of the character that was very engaging to me.
Mm.
I think it was the voice of the narration almost more than like the actual writing itself. It's just something about that worked and had me invested, even though it's a bit over the top at points. The one thing I would caution with the Fitz comparison is that's you're not going to get Hobbes style character writing either. It's definitely different. But that first person kind of telling the story after the fact and the little snippets, you definitely get some of that kind of stuff. And I think though it's with that as well. Some of the things that I do think are interesting, and again, there are a lot of familiar elements, but then the unique things I think are interesting because Hadrian, as has been mentioned, doesn't want to run off to become a gladiator. He wants to run off to become like a scientist, basically, like you know, and a scholar. And like, what book do you read where they're like, I want to go off and the exploration a little bit, maybe, but it's so different. It's not the character that wants to be. And well, yeah, he's physically strong and fit because of his genes mostly, and can fight. He's not a fighter. He's not a soldier. That's not his first impulse. He's getting jumped. His first impulse is to be like talk his way out of it and that kind of thing. And so there are moments like that, and I like that. I think that sets him up as an interesting character. Like the moments where you can just feel the genuine interest in like anthropology and history also were extremely engaging moments for me, and they felt so real. Where the character is just like I felt like those are the parts that I really liked. So I think it's again there were some rough parts for me. I really do think that there were some parts like that I'm like we're not the best or we're getting things figured out. But also it's the character is interesting. I can't say that I necessarily do like Hadrian, and there were definitely some times that I just wanted to say shut up about the sun. Just throwing another joke in there. Mentioned that just a few too many times in book one for me. I'm sure there'll be more, but it also is just like I don't know the style, and I do think the audio because that's how, especially it's like a distinguished voice, and Hadrian's telling this story from sometime in the future. It works. It just fits so well with the narration style, and so I feel like it upped my enjoyment for sure because I did a lot of book one on audio. I started hybrid reading, and then I just liked the audio so much I mostly did that. But also it plays into the character voice, which I think the voice is really good. That's there the whole time, and I think consistent, even though there are some other bumps along the way.
Yeah. Andrew?
So from what all you're saying, I'm now realizing too that book one is a Maiden's Arc. So
I was wondering when you were bringing that up.
Right,
so here we go. Everybody,
just the fact that he is so much more his mother's son than his father's, and that's what he wants to be.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that both of his parents have given up their free will to become who they are required to be. So his mother's given up entirely. I'm just gonna be an actress, sleep around, do whatever I want, with no choice in life whatsoever. So even that life is something he doesn't want, while his father wants him to rule, which is something he doesn't want. So he wants to not be a gladiator. He does not want to. He does want to be a scholiast, and in the end, he's forced to be a gladiator and forced to be a archaeologist. Neither of which are really his choice. He's forced to do so as his only outlet for freedom, which then acts as the Maiden's Arc to tie in both halves of his psyche into one, leading into the Hero's Arc of book 2. No spoilers. But as Ben, especially as you were talking about that trying to figure out where he's going with his life too, is that I'm realizing now more so halfway through the series now how much book one really does have it set up from the beginning as a free will versus predestination argument the whole time. And what choice do we have except to have choice? And it's right there from the first chapter, is that he just wants choice, but sometimes choice can only be had in following the will of others. And he loses himself because of that, because he tries to flee and ends up being thrown into nowhere and put through worse trauma than he'd already experienced, which is a huge argument for why the cat chapters are so important, is because they're, even though they're so small, they're the truly definitive chapters for his whole life, because he is always thinking back to the what if he had just died right there. And we all have that summer where we went somewhere and had that one moment that really doesn't have an effect on the whole rest of our life, except it's our personal gem or trauma that defines us 30 years later, because it's that one thing that was just ours in our teenage years. Even if we had a rough time as a kid, there's always that time that's just ours, whether it's going overseas to another country or whatever that is. And that's what the cat chapters are. It feels like to me, even 4 books later, it's still that thing that hangs over him as the what if, and defines him now so much farther on. So
I agree with that.
I liked.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I liked, although like is probably the wrong word, the way that it kind of ended with the description of just sitting and watching everybody dying around him, his genes keeping him safe, because that was a really good passage part there.
He was a humanizing moment for him.
Yeah.
In his inhumanity, as because his genes make him not human. And isn't that so much of the struggle and the discussion of the entire book too, is what does it even mean to be human? That he is not a homunculus when he totally is a homunculus. All of the nobility are homunculuses. And the fact that they can call themselves human but not the homunculuses is something else too.
Well, and I find it interesting too, because I always read like the author's notes and the dedication and all of that kind of stuff when I read a book. And he had dedicated this first book to his grandparents. And I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of with this conversation going on a little bit, because that idea of being stuck in time while everyone around you is getting older and passing away and like all of that kind of stuff. For me was kind of a relevant in the moment, because I'm, getting towards the end of my final grandparents' life. And that concept, I think, is so human, you take the immortality aspect out of it, that we all go through that kind of a journey through our lives too. And I think that's one of the parts about Hadrian and all of the reflective bits that he had that I really connected with the most. And obviously I'm older than Hadrian was then, so I have a different view on life than he did. But and I almost wonder too, because you guys are talking about the audiobook a lot. So everybody here except me listened to the audiobook, correct?
Really?
Yeah.
I'm the only physical reader, physical only reader. Right. So what I think is interesting about that is I'm assuming, based on what Andrew, you mentioned before we went live, that the narrator has an older Hadrian voice because he's the one telling the story, right?
Yeah, I mean,
back and forth a little.
He does a really good job of Hadrian's telling the story, but he definitely elevates when he's narrating versus when he's speaking. Younger. So it's still his voice, and then he does voices throughout. Okay,
yeah. But I was just wondering, like, when I'm reading the chapters, I don't hear it as if older Hadrian is telling. Like, no. I'm in the moment with young Hadrian.
Except when actual older Hadrian's talking.
is talking,
And then
my brain switches then to kind of because
right.
the prose fits that too.
It does, and he doesn't quite go to like Tor Gibson voice when he's doing that, but it is kind of like that. He puts more weariness into his own voice when he's reading as the Imperial narrator. So it's both weary and noble as he's reading those excerpts, but otherwise it's just narrator and Hadrian talking.
That's exactly it. Weariness. That's a really good way to say it.
Yeah. I have promised Andrew that I'm going to listen to a section of Howling Dark with the audio, just because I've been hearing so many good things.
It is really good.
It's really good.
I had heard really good things about it as well. And like I said, I fully plan on hybrid reading. I get through books quicker that way if I'm reading multiple formats. And I ended up taking a little bit longer and just doing audio after a while, because every time I started reading, I'm just like, yeah, but like I'm not reading it in Samuel Ruocchio's voice as well as he does. And so I don't know. It's one of those perfect fit scenarios. I think for this type of story and for the character voice, it's the character voice is very synonymous with the way that Samuel Ruocchio reads it.
For
me.
Let's see.
Like if I could, I would get all 7 of my books signed by both Ruocchio and Ruocchio.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Bucket list. I hope you enjoy both, Mark. I think they're both good for different reasons. Let's go into prose / pacing and structure, because I feel like all of those things are kind of like in the same general overview. So let's see, who should we start with? Do you want to start again?
Prose and pacing and structure.
Yeah, so like the way the story's written.
Yeah, part of this had to do with the fact that the book was, if I'm remembering right, like it was discovery written, right? Like he didn't necessarily have the whole thing plotted out.
I believe that is partially true. I think he was forced to have more structure starting with book 2 and on.
Okay. Because I kind of actually like that aspect of it, because like typically the stories that we tell ourselves are fairly linear, but life is really not as linear as it is conveniently portrayed in stories. And so I don't know, like sometimes you fall out of the plot of your story and you're just homeless for a while, and Hadrian realizes after a while, if I don't do anything different, I'm just going to be homeless for the rest of this book. So I suppose maybe I'll go get a job doing something, and maybe save up for that ship faster than I will being homeless. Yeah. So I like that aspect of it, that it seemed it made the story seem more true to life. I guess the fact that it was broken and messy, and now things are happening, and now it seems like we're in a weird spot. Yeah. It really made it hard for me to really know where the story was going. Like I know old Hadrian is telling me where the story goes eventually, but I have no idea how he gets from here now, because it seems like he's trapped, but then he's not. It's good. I enjoyed it.
I feel like I did enjoy the prose. I think there are flashes of there are some really great passages that are really good, and then there are some other times where things aren't as just as the baseline I did enjoy. The pacing and structure are probably the things I had the most issues with, though, overall, and I thought were the poorest part of the book for me personally. Finding out that this was largely discovery written makes a lot of sense in retrospect, because it did kind of just feel like he didn't know where he was going at points, and there were definitely some points where things just sort of happened because we needed to move on, it felt like, which the end of this book very specifically it just kind of felt like, and now this is happening so that we can do this. And I suppose I can talk spoilers now. I don't know why.
Yeah, you can. Go for it.
Yeah, I have no idea why I defaulted there, but the whole oh, you had this whole plan, but nope, now we're just going to, put you on a ship and send you off on a mission. And yep, you can totally bring your Colosso buddies with you. Why wouldn't you be able to? And I'm just like,
I think that was more convenient too. Yeah.
Get that motley crew.
it felt way too convenient and just kind of cheesy to me, and I wasn't expecting the cheesy ending. I didn't hate it, but I'm like, really? This is what we're doing? And so I felt like that was this part. Yeah, things just moved sort of abruptly. The pacing was a little bit all over the place. But it was, again, the prose and just the character voice and the writing. It was enough that even though I'm like, yeah, I don't really care about the gladiator bits too much, but I'm interested enough in the big picture, and I'm enjoying myself enough. It's like that's where I think the audio helped as well. I was enjoying the experience of the audio enough that even if I really didn't like the book, I probably would have continued with book 2 anyway, just because I like the narrator. So that wasn't the only thing, obviously, but I'm just like, you know what, I'm enjoying myself enough. I like the style and the prose enough that I'm willing to look past some of the faults and flaws. Also, keeping in mind that it's a debut from a young author, which doesn't make the things I don't like better necessarily, but it's always like, I feel like you have to have that understanding of when it's a debut, there are going to be some hiccups, and that's where you see where it goes. Everybody says that book 2 really picks up, so I'll be interested to see.
Yeah,
I didn't have so much of a problem with the pacing because I had read sci-fi in college. And so my argument for that is that in a lot of science fiction, if you're going to set up a large universe with a lot of travel time, you're going to have gaps. And so gaps between chapters didn't bother me. That we go from theater to theater to theater of situation. I read a lot of Warhammer in college, and when you go from theater of war to theater of war to theater of war, the episodic or anthology style of book didn't bother me in the slightest, because I felt the scope of the universe, even though I knew we had only left a little bit. And even before we got on, I was looking at the map and realizing how much actually does jump around a little bit, even in the book 1. That then later he spends a lot of time in the series talking about how long it really does take to get somewhere. Not when you're in Fugue, but when you're in but just the actual time that's happening while you're in Fugue. Or times when you wake up for a couple of years and are waiting for something to happen and you're just doing paperwork for 60 years or whatever.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which to me also felt kind of like a galactic size version of ancient Rome. Like, how do you travel to China? Well, there's time on the prairie and hoping you don't get raided. And so you have months of time, only now it's years or decades of time, because it's galactic as opposed to crossing the Central Asian plains or taking something by ship. So for me, that kind of scope was just a dilation of the scope, to say scope for the 50th time.
Which, I mean, to be fair, is why most sci-fi with space things do some sort of instant travel. I don't know if that's going to be a thing later or not, but it is an interesting choice to not do that and to focus on that. Because I do feel like that's something that you don't see as much, and that does thematically seem to be very important early on as well. So that's another thing I think it'll be interesting to see big picture where that goes. But it is another interesting choice where he's not just doing the easy thing where like, oh, we can just go here. It sets up for a lot of other things to happen, and I'm not crazy well read in sci-fi, like I mentioned, but
it's one of the things that bothers me with Star Wars is that you've got that, well, it'll be a while, it's 1 hour. It's like, was it really? No, they were actually on the ship for 3 weeks. Then why are they only just now having this conversation? And I appreciate when an author can try to deal with time well enough that you feel that the time has actually passed.
Kayla?
I would say for prose, I found it eloquent but accessible, and it does a really good job at setting the tone of Hadrian's entire experience with everything he goes through. So I think all of that was pretty well consistent throughout. Really well done. When it comes to pacing, I do think there is a bit of moving around. I think everyone who's talked about it already has already given really good viewpoints into that. For myself, I more or less broke this into 3 parts. The first major chunk, you have that middle section, and then the end. The first and the final sections, I think, are what really hooked me and really kept me going. And Nico kind of mentioned that comment from the Discord, which was my own experience of the middle part just felt like the author's playground. And they were exploring the world, the characters, and a lot of it was that exploration and trying to figure it all out, which is intriguing in its own way. And it delves into some interesting concepts and themes. And, I think depending on the reader, everyone's going to have a different experience with that. Even on reread, I could see myself having a different experience of it. But I could see it being a block for some readers and others just gobbling that up because of the journey that it takes you on. But I think that final section is what I agree with Nico, like, get on the ship. We're having a fun time. Bring the party, bring your friends. It's like kind of, if you are the right type of reader or wrong type of reader, depending on perspective, you could stop there. There are some people who would see that as a happy, open-ended ending, and they would leave it there. He goes on a spaceship. He's happy with all his friends. Cool. But at the same time, for myself, I was like, okay, I get that viewpoint, but also where did they go? I want to know. I'm a world building and lore loving type of reader. So all of the questions that it started to raise in that final section, everything that it started to explore in that area really piqued my curiosity. And so in terms of structure, I would say the last third part, like that final part of the book, is what really sold me into book 2. Everything else is building up and giving you a taste of what the author has in store. And I'm only talking from book 1. This is just what I expect will happen. So if there are those, Andrew, who have read further in the series, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I do feel like it gives us a glimpse into the scope and the possible types of structure that we will see, because I know you guys talked a bit about the human experience, and this might not be the right category to talk about it. But even going back to the references we were talking about earlier, a lot of this to me was solidified through Stoicism. There was a lot of references to Stoicism. A lot of their philosophical views are based in Stoicism to me. So I think when it comes to structure, and that being a core part of Hadrian's character to me as well, we're going to be seeing a lot more of those references, a lot more of that, not necessarily disconnect from humanity, but awareness of the human experience and having a grander control and restraint in the reactions from the characters as we go through. Because from my understanding of the little that I've read of Stoicism, is that it's more about being mindful of our reactions to circumstances rather than being emotionless. So the emotions are there, but we are, Stoics are more mindful of how they react, knowing that that's going to have a grander effect later on. So I could see structure-wise that being a huge aspect later on, depending on if he keeps going with that core element that he's introduced within this first one, because there are so many Stoic references in this book.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Andrew, if it continues, but
that's a fantastic analysis.
Yeah. So to me, structure wise, I'm really curious to see if that will continue, but that partly hooked me as well.
Which is funny, because if you get into Stoicism, like even Marcus Aurelius talks about how you shouldn't, he's writing down a journal of his Stoic thoughts, but saying, but you shouldn't read these because you should have your own experiences. So don't read my works.
Yeah.
So we all read his Stoic writing, but we're not supposed to read it.
Selling.
You're not supposed to read it. And you're not really supposed to think about the future or the past, just today. And then we've got Hadrian in a plot that I won't spoil anything, is completely against stoicism in that sense.
Yeah. And you know, it kind of, to me, it goes back to Gibson as well. Like Gibson was very much, he embodied that to me. Hadrian wasn't a great student. He was smart in ways, but you know, he didn't always follow in Gibson's footsteps in terms of control and temperament. That's probably the best way to put it.
No, he didn't always do that.
Yeah.
So I definitely break this story, first book, into 3 sections as well in terms of my experience with it. I liked the first third, whatever that was, as we're setting up Hadrian's life and his family, and we're getting a lot of the kind of Palatine view of the worlds and how that one class viewpoint perceives everything, right? And I do appreciate that we get, you know, Hadrian doesn't stay there the whole book. We go from Palatine Hadrian, who's the potential heir of this, you know, pretty lauded house, to he's literally could die in the next hour on the street. And we're getting, I like when a character's worldview is really challenged by their circumstances and by their surroundings within a story, because I think that offers a lot of really good character contrast, and I definitely saw that with Hadrian. So in that sense, I appreciated that switch of environment for him. What I struggled with, and I think I've been trying really hard to figure out how to articulate this, when I'm reading, I am such a character focused writer that what is my through line for every story I read is, it's like I'm rope in a blizzard, right? And the characters are that rope, and I'm hand over hand going through this blizzard, and there's world building everywhere and all of this facts and information that I'm trying to keep up with. My characters are my true north in every book I read. And if I don't, it felt like we get to the middle. I'm like, oh, yep, okay, we're here, we got this. I'm starting to invest in Hadrian, whether I like him or not at any given moment. I'm invested in what's happening to him. I'm invested in the people around him. And then the rope, somebody on the other end takes the rope and just goes, and like, I felt so unmoored, basically, through that part where, and I couldn't invest. There was no emotional impact with anything I read in that middle section, because I was trying to like scrabble and find my footing again with that character experience.
So was Hade.
Huh?
So was Hadrian.
Sure. So, okay, but this, all right, you're touching on something that's a pet peeve of mine. So I'll go there. Intentional does not equal good experience. You know what I mean? Like for each individual reader. Right. And I can appreciate from an objective viewpoint the parts of the middle that gave us bits of the story that, like you said, are going to really be foundational for who Hadrian becomes in later books and throughout the series, and also have had a very jarring, frustrating reader experience with it, if that makes sense. Because I wanted to be invested and I just didn't know what to care about, because things were happening like so randomly and so all over the place that I didn't feel like I was in a space long enough to care. And I think a big reason why that was so jarring is because the pacing changes so drastically between those 3 parts. If it had all been that really kind of anthology, episodic kind of bits and pieces, right? Like Kayla and I have been reading some modern Japanese storytelling, like short novels. And it's very simple. It's very episodic. You get bits and pieces and flashes. And that's the way the story is told. And I love that. When it's this, I settle in because, this is the style that I can expect. Cool. Now I can focus on what's going on around me. And then all of a sudden that's completely thrown out and I have to like relearn how to read it, if that makes sense. So that's why I think, I don't know how well I articulated that, but that was kind of the the struggle I had with the middle pacing. The final 30%, absolutely loved it. And I'm going to be the person who's like, yes, Motley Crue at the end, because like the gladiators
Crue.
were some of my favorite
Party.
parts of the story. And we'll get to my favorite character in a little bit here, but it was, I was like, if they don't take the gladiators,
I don't care if it
I don't
doesn't
care.
make sense. We need the gladiator.
it
Yes.
makes sense. We need gladiators on this ship. So like, I totally agree, Nico. It was very like, hey, and then, you know, but I forgave it because I wanted it. So I was like, cool, they're on the ship. Good.
So let me give a little pushback too, in that I think you can compare this book in contrast to Name of the Wind, which I know you haven't read, Tori.
Mm-mm.
But in Name of the Wind, when he is thrown to the wind in the middle of the book, oh look, he's awesome at everything he does, no matter what he does, everywhere he goes. And Hadrian's not. Hadrian
Which I
craps up
love.
everything he touches
Yeah, love
as
that.
he goes. So I think there was a contrast. That's a good contrast comparison to Name of the Wind, in that you don't go through it going, oh look, Hadrian's going to be awesome again this chapter. It's he really gets crapped on for that whole center section, and that's which you kind of cheer a little bit because you're like, he needs to get kicked to the curb a couple times.
Yeah, we need
So
a
that
reality.
he can find his North Star, which you're going to talk about here in a minute.
Yeah. Cool.
I will just give a big thumbs up to the intentional part, because just because something's intentional doesn't A, make it good, or B, make it enjoyable to everyone. And that's one of those things that I feel like I've had that where I'm like, I really didn't like this. And people are like, well, yeah, it was intentional. I'm like, yeah, I still didn't like it.
Cool.
And that's fine.
I believe you.
You know, and that's like, you know, something can be intentional. And it can even be really well done for what the author was trying to do. Doesn't mean everyone's going to like it. So.
Yeah. Well, and I recognize too that I have a very specific, like, each of us has a very individual way of reading books, and the way that our reading experience is structured and the way that we best engage and invest with what's going on in the story. And that's, again, going to be different for every single person. So me saying this was like, that was my experience in the middle, I'm also still objectively saying it's still a good book. And I appreciate what it does well. Samwise is here. Hi, Sam. Doug is here as well. Just to well, you know, people say all sorts of things on BookTube. This is another very divisive series, and a little shade to Nico.
No, and I appreciate it though, because it's 100% a great example of what I was talking about. That series is brilliant in its totality, but I had a rough time getting into it myself. And I absolutely get when people don't like it. And if people are just like, yeah, I don't like the character, I'm like, that's 100% fair. Yeah, the character is intentionally awful, but if you don't like that, which is fair, he's, especially in the first trilogy, he's awful. Totally fair. And so, yeah, I think that's still exactly the point. He does know I like that, so that probably wasn't the shade. That's all good. Doug's a good guy.
Let's see. You know what, Brian? I needed to give Ben. That's really his department.
Tortekken.
Yeah.
You know, I thought about that, but then I was like, it's too close to Tori.
They'd be confused on which
Everybody
of us
would be
which.
confused. Yeah.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to tell us apart. Okay. ADHD reader, hello. How's it going? All right, let's move to, what did I have next? Let's do characters next, and then we'll finish with world building and concepts, because I feel like all of us have a lot to say about the world building and concepts specifically. And it seems like that was an area that all of us really felt invested and excited about. So that'll be a good way to end out. Let's talk about the cast outside of Hadrian, because we are introduced to a lot of characters in this book, and some we get brief interactions with, and some, you know, longer stints within the book. So I'm curious to know how you guys liked the cast, who your favorite character was, what were some of the character moments that really stood out to you overall outside of Hadrian. Andrew, do you want to start us off this time?
Valka.
That was fast. No
I mean-
hesitation.
No, I mean, honestly, Hadrian is my favorite character in the book. However, Volca is intriguing from the beginning, even though in book 1, I wasn't sure she was even going to be in book 2.
Yeah.
Just the way that she is a secondary character, but that she is, I walking into the book knowing it was a fantasy, and then when they drop in that Volca's a witch, like, how are you a witch? Because she's a hacker. It's like, okay, I see where you're going. And then you continue to get more and more fantasy as technology as fantasy elements, and it only gets bigger the farther you go in the series. That you're like, okay, he's playing on a different meta level. But I thought that was a really fun way to do that, especially when they discuss the history of Earth and that the witchcraft of AI and all that commentary just feeds into why Volca is feared. And she was just such a great, reasonable person. I loved her reason in that she's able to tell him to shut up. She's the only person who can do that in the whole book, who's able to tell him to shut up, and he listens to her. He never once really truly questions her. Yeah.
I don't have any strong thoughts here, to be honest. I didn't really latch on that much to any of the side characters. I'm not a super character-focused reader, so you always have to take that with a grain of salt, because it's not the full thing. But I liked Volca just because we were that when we got into the kind of the scholarship things and having like the scholar, witch character was kind of fun too. But I was definitely more focused on other things, but I did find Hadrian to be a very interesting character.
Yeah. I'm just going to briefly pop in ADHD Reader's comment, because I actually don't know that you're an underlier or an outlier, because I do think that, I think book 1 is solid. I really do. And I think a lot of fans of the series still really love book 1. So you're definitely not alone. Hi, Daniel. How's it going? All right, Kayla, hit us with your character thoughts.
I actually have a question for Andrew, following up on his about Velka. Because my perspective with Hadrian listening to Velka is because of his experiences. I think if he had met her earlier, do you think that he would shut up the way she demands? Or do you think that he would push back? Did his experiences change how he
I would
reacted
wager
to her?
if she had showed up at Devil's Rest and Tor Gibson was there, he might not. Because then he would still be under Gibson's tutelage. And so obviously Tor Gibson's smarter, right? Because he's my scholar. So I could see that being a problem. So being separate from Tor Gibson and being separate from his world and no longer being considered a patrician allows him to listen to somebody who's not even part of the Empire. Because she's Norman. So it's from a totally different culture. When he comes from a monoculture that he's from, I think he would probably not listen to her in that case. But because he had that time to separate from his original culture, he allowed for the input of outer cultures, because she's not, and even in the Empire, she's a complete outsider because she's from a variant human, the Normans versus the Romans.
Right.
So,
Okay.
Can I also interject really quickly there? Because I just thought of this. I think one of the other reasons why her voice of reason carried more weight for Hadrian is because Tor Gibson left a void behind. And when we move into that last part of the story, he misses Gibson's voice of reason. He misses having that mentor kind of safety net in a lot of ways. And I think however he felt about Volca person to person, I think her voice of reason kind of filled that void for him in some ways, which may have given him kind of added like a subconscious weight to her. Because they're not the same character, obviously, but I think they kind of have
I would also point out that that Ruocchio established Hadrian from the beginning as a sexually prudent character.
Mhm. Yeah,
And so
true.
Volka's off limits from the beginning.
Mhm.
And so he can listen to her, and even if he reveres her as a beautiful goddess of a character, it's not a sexual thing. So he can listen to her as another human being, because that's not there as a young man. Even as a young man, that's not something that is part of his psyche. So I think that helps him too, that he can listen to her as a scholar who's and plus at that point she's older than him. I think she's in her 50s or 60s, and he's still in his 30s at that point, 40s at that point. And even later in the book, he'll comment on the fact that he always views her as older than him, even when there's a switch because of time frame in space, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that, I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah. I'm gonna add a little bit to that too, just because I think his previous experience, I can't remember her name, but the guard that he did push himself onto, that also put him a big distance between himself and Volka as a result of that, I think.
Yeah, which is only one line. It's practically a one-liner thing, but he embarrassed himself so badly at that point that he realized he had overstepped a line he never wanted to cross again. Which, Tori, to our conversation earlier today, that feeds into his future too.
Yeah. And then going through what he did, I think another part of it too was he was basically a prisoner in a gilded cage. He was like, "Oh, you don't know the things I've been through," when she was hating on him, kind of concept. So I think that allowed him to build a bridge as well. But in regards to my own side character that I really liked, I'm a sucker for the mentor. I love Gibson, and even though I know what was going to happen to Gibson, still like, save Gibson.
We can't have positive father figures in SFF.
They don't last long.
But I just loved his role to Hadrian. He filled the void that was missing from his own parents, and he did it he did it in such a way where Gibson obviously knew better, but he let Hadrian make his mistakes, and he took the brunt of those mistakes in his stead for him. To me, that was just like, the height of parental love, self-sacrifice for the betterment of the child. Doesn't matter if it's your own blood or not, So for me, Gibson is the ultimate big bro. He wins.
Huh.
Nico, did you want to say something to that?
Well, so because that reminded me there. So the lieutenant, whose name I also can't recall, at the beginning. So that okay, I will believe you. I don't.
I know she was in Devil. She was in Lesser Devil too.
Yeah, okay. So because I liked that moment, and because that was like a really big early on character moment, like a realization about himself and looking at kind of the power imbalance. But was I the only one who felt like the whole then finding out that she was like a plant afterward, and that like she actually like it kind of made the moment a little bit more false, because it seemed like it was partially like his mother was testing him, and it was that moment that was part of like, oh, he's not necessarily his father's son, but also like later like finding out that she was there, and like the situation wasn't quite what it seemed. For me, it made it almost feel like it lost a little bit of weight because it wasn't as organic. So I was curious on that, because it's obviously still a really important character moment, but like she could have gotten out at any time, and then like ends up going off with him later and that kind of thing as well. And so it's just like, I don't know. I felt like that was, if they wouldn't have thrown that detail in and there would have been like some other way that he escaped, I just felt like it lessened it for me, even though it was still a really good moment.
Well, I think it makes you question how genuine was that reaction in a way that, like, was it a moment where Kyra was giving him a genuine reaction and kind of,
maybe she was a plant, but maybe she's also
but she still has feelings, you know what I mean, or whatever it might be. So I think you definitely, depending on how you look at it, could go either way, to be honest. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
The self-discovery of Hadrian in that moment is it's so cool, because he's sitting there realizing I just want to be a regular guy and have a crush, and I can't, because anyone that I would have a crush on is going to interpret that as there's a reason he's interested in me politically, or what, for whatever reason. Why is that? When they're, he's just interested in making human connections, but his position doesn't allow him to do that.
And it does come full circle later on when the roles are swapped, right? And he's in that arranged marriage, and he has that moment in the cave, the kind of final scenes of the book where, it's a whole role reversal, right?
Yeah.
He's on the opposite end, and he thinks of that situation at the beginning, and how she must have felt back then, and how how he is now. So I do think it was a nice callback, and to me, it was more about Hadrian's reaction than just her own. And how it kind of came to bite him in the butt later.
Yeah. I love an arranged marriage trope so much.
So lovely.
Yeah.
Adrian didn't.
Yeah, right.
That's for sure.
Adrian and I felt the same about that whole situation.
Like 20 minutes after that, he ran. So
I don't blame him, honestly.
I don't know what part
What
of the
a
book I'm
nightmare.
in, but I'm getting out of this.
Come on, gladiators, get on the ship.
I did love the how oblivious he was, though, and to the whole thing. It did work for me too, because I've been accused of being a bit oblivious to things like that in my time. So I could definitely feel that. And like,
were you in an
oh,
arranged
God.
marriage, Nico?
I wasn't in an arranged
one point?
marriage,
Okay.
but
Hope I
like,
was not listening.
no, like, well, because she'll make fun of me, because she'll say, like, if somebody's apparently flirting with me, I've never noticed. She'll be afterwards. She'd be like, oh, that person was totally. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Was there even a person there? What? No. But so it's just like, see, like the described as this very beautiful, because she's Palatine, and like, they're like, oh, trying to be near him, touching the arm. Like, I mean, you could see a mile away what's coming. It is anyone but Hadrian, and he's just like, nah. There's Cialis and stuff to talk about. Like, I'm gonna go talk to Valka. Like, what do you know? Like, come on. Like, and
doing my nerd stuff. Leave me alone.
I'm
yeah,
supposed to teach you
like,
languages.
that's those things definitely did. I liked those moments as well, and it's another thing that parts of the character I liked.
Yeah. It's very endearing.
Yeah.
What you do?
Oh, I mean, I also am a huge sucker for mentors. Like, I could just read mentors all the time, and they always die, and it's really sad. But
Yes.
but while they stick around, like, it's such a great father son or big brother younger brother type of thing. And yeah, like, Alistair gets points partially for having such a cool name, but also because actually both of Hadrian's parents are kind of interesting in their own way. Like, I don't know, I just found Alistair, especially his commitment to his family, only in so much as they support the goal of the family.
If you're, it's like the mafia. If you're not in the family business, you're not in the family.
That's what it was. It was very much mafia-like, and I kind of like that aspect, and I liked his 100% commitment to it. Yeah, I admired him for that, at least. But and like the
great guy.
Distance that slowly grew as Hadrian realizes that, like, he's never going to have a really good relationship with his father, because it's just not the type of person his father is.
Yeah.
It's also very indicative of a military family, like a military Marian, that he was married in to the wealth, and he treats it, I mean, a lot like what's his fart, Kyle Haven, that he married in, and he's from a lesser family, that the mother is actually the blood. And so Alistair really has to handle it like a general who's going to use his martial ability to just force everything into submission.
But I mean, otherwise, Crispin, I also thought was kind of cool, or and interesting. They were interesting, like players on the chessboard in the first third of the book. Balka is also awesome for all of the reasons that have been said, and I also really appreciated Kat. That whole her relationship with Hadrian through the second portion of the book is really like sentimental, but in a really good way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost in a way like he gets to have the like free childhood that he never got to have, even though they're in this horrible situation. That's like the freest he is through the entire book. And which is, you know, the ending of that is really sad because Kat doesn't get to move on. But I don't think she could have handled any of the things that Hadrian went through after that either. So
quick shout out also to Uvenari, because nobody's mentioned him.
Yeah.
But like the moment when he looks at the chantry and he's like, you healed me just to torture me now, and he's like laughing at it, but then all of a sudden he's like, oh shoot, they're actually gonna torture me.
Can we Daniel has a comment here. How many books have a mentor that doesn't die? If someone has the answer, please let me know. I'm sure Ben would also want to know.
The mentor character in Prydain doesn't die, right?
I haven't read Prydain.
Watch me read this, and then
no, that is correct.
At least in the first two books. I haven't read the third one yet, but
he does not.
It depends on how you define a mentor character too.
Well, would Torquil mean as much if he didn't die?
I know, but still, I want to read about it.
So I wondered, Nico, then if that means it's an argument for the Welsh storytelling. Doesn't, because Merlin doesn't die until way later in the story when he gets frozen up, but that's way at the end. That doesn't count. And the same would be true for like Riddlemaster.
I couldn't get that one.
I have trouble too, but the mentor doesn't ever actually die.
Curse of Shalion.
Yeah.
Well, the mentor's the
Prydain.
Exactly. Kayla, have you read this?
I have not.
Ooh.
You would like this, I think. And this is from the perspective of the mentor character, which is why I think you would love this.
And then you two can do Paladin of Souls together as a buddy read. You guys would be perfect for that.
Kayla and I
also need to read
reading like 125 buddy read books together.
And like every other time, I'm in.
But everybody should totally read Prydain, though. It is a children's series. Yeah, it's good. It was my first toe into fantasy when I was like 6 years old. And I read the last book first because it was in my library in elementary school. And then many years later, I had to figure out what it was. But it's aged surprisingly well for being 65 years old-ish.
So what I'll say about the characters is as a group, I was so incredibly hooked and invested the minute the Cielsen showed up on the stage. The minute. Like, I'm so intrigued by them as a culture, and they're like, as Hadrian thinks he's starting to figure them out and starts having this dialogue with them, and you know that like there's gonna be twists in the future where like he thinks he knows something and really doesn't. And just, I appreciate authors who can make aliens feel like inhuman, because I feel like that's actually really hard to do. And there wasn't a minute in that entire section where I was like, yeah, it's a little too, like, they're just basically like weird looking humans, you know? I didn't feel like that at any point when they were brought in. And I loved Uvenari I loved like the whole part of the ending with him. And my favorite character up to that point, Hadrian's fine. Like, Hadrian and I, we had kind of a 50-50s Russian roulette throughout the book in terms of whether or not I was happy to be in his company or not. But Switch was my favorite character in book one, which, if you think about it, and anybody who knows me is not surprising, because he has a very broken past, and he's trying to survive, and he's trying to learn how to trust people in a survival situation. And he's good at heart. You know what I mean? Like there's a purity there in book one that I think Hadrian really needed in his life, to be honest. And yeah, Switch is hands down my favorite, which is one of the reasons, Nico, why when we got to the ending, I was like, I swear if Switch is not on this spaceship, I quit. But I like that kind of military survival-esque motley crew. That's my thing. So as soon as they showed up, I was like, especially in that very jarring middle section, they were incredibly grounding to me, because that's a trope of characters that I really like. So I credit them for pulling me through a good chunk of that end of the middle. But yeah, I thought it was a very cool, diverse personality cast. Like there's enough for everybody there. Like I feel like there's definitely side characters that will appeal to a lot of different readers in terms of what they like in character. Yeah, I saw you were mentioning Switch a couple of times in the comments, and I was like, yes, that, but I can't say it yet. So yeah, totally. Switch fan club. That's true. Daniel points out that the mentor does not technically die and stay dead. Spoilers.
True.
Living under a rock.
I'll give that to you, Daniel.
Wow, I was just gonna read it this year.
Sorry, Nico. Okay, so let's finish with talking a little bit about world building and concepts, because we've all talked, like we've bits and pieces that throughout the conversation, and I think it's, for me at least, and it seems like for you guys too, it's one of the major plus points of all of our experiences. So,
oh man, is it the silent? That's what they're called?
The quiet.
The quiet. All right. The quiet are so creepy and interesting in their absence, mostly from the entire narrative. Just like walking into a place and knowing this seems wrong, because there should be some kind of like remnants here, but there's nothing. It is pristine, it is clean, and it is unmarkable. Like you can't scratch it away. It's just there. I love it. It's sort of a permanent fixture against the, like, oh, what's the word I'm thinking of? The politics of the chantry. Yeah. No, I love that aspect of it. The quiet. Really cool. And I also really appreciated now that I'm thinking of it, the fact, sort of like you were talking about, Andrew, the magification of science, and especially AI, that they're going to call AI essentially demons, and anyone who deals in that kind of technology as being a witch of some kind or something like that. Yeah.
More than you know, Ben. More than you know.
Yeah. That's really cool. I appreciated that, because you're getting elements where it's like, these people are in the future, they're beyond me, but with regard to this aspect of things, they're almost archaic. They're treating it archaically. Yeah. It's really interesting perspective, especially since you're getting it through Hadrian, and he's getting it through all of the people that have told him about all of the things. So you have this wonderful sort of hypocrisy that evolves, where he starts to, even in the very beginning, you see the roots of him looking at the Cielson and saying, wait, maybe they're not that different from me. Whereas the homunculus will say to Hadrian, we're actually a lot similar. And Hadrian just like, no, we are not, because I'm a person and you're not. Like, yeah. Those are my thoughts.
That's good.
Yeah.
Andrew?
The exploration, going back to exploration of humanity, is so prevalent through the entire series that's like when what does it take to leave humanity behind? And what does that look like in other alien cultures? Where, yeah, at what point do you leave humanity behind? At what point is it just a cultural thing? At what point is it actually no longer becoming a demon yourself? And that's where, like, I mentioned it in my review on Goodreads that, you know, I grew up with a lot of Warhammer stuff, which deals with the demonic and magic and all that. And then I read that Ruocchio has never actually consumed any Warhammer, but there's so many Warhammer comps that are happening that it made me realize kind of how unoriginal Warhammer can be at times, which is fine. That's great. There's lots of unoriginal things that can still be fun, but the big comparison of that is they both deal with what does it mean to leave humanity behind and become a demon, and when is it not a demon and just a different kind of being? You know, are you really a demon if you can genocide people? Yes, you would say that metaphorically you are a demon, but are you actually a spiritual demon at that point? And there's so many Venn diagrams in Sun Eater where it's like, no, I think you can argue that at this point this particular being is a literal demon, even if it's not a demon. But is it? I don't know. There's I can't wait to get to the rest of the series to find out what more there is to be done. But yeah, and that's what I love about the world building, is just that there's so much happening at all times for everybody, and I don't think anybody can ever really truly be bored. I know there's times when you can be bored because it's not your thing, but the farther you get on, you'll still look back and say, okay, I get what you were doing. I'm not bored anymore because thank you for getting me here.
Nico?
So I'm curious if I'm the only one who absolutely was seeing the Cielson as the Wraith from Stargate Atlantis, because that is immediately where my mind went. Like, maybe it was just me. I was immediately seeing them as the Wraith, and kind of like the, you know, exploring the ancient civilizations made me think that too. As far as I know, they don't, like, you know, suck the life out of people with their hands, but there's talk of them like eating people and consuming. So I mean, like, there was enough, and kind of the general physical description reminded me a bit. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I love Stargate, but yeah, I as kind of mentioned earlier, especially like when they're exploring the ruins, when the Cielsons show up, that whole kind of mystery of who are the Quiet. What is the connection to the Cielson? They say they came to worship like the Quiet, or like in some way like gods, or at least like revered ancestors. The big ideas of how this, you know, calls into question with for Hadrian everything about history and religion that he's been told, because we're starting to realize, even though he, you know, sees himself as skeptical in some ways, he's still very naive when it comes to what's real and what's not. And so it's those flashes, those are what I really want to explore. Like, I'm so curious to find out more about that. And I mean, from the way it was set up, I imagine the Quiet and those connections are going to very much be consistently something that's looked at throughout the series. And like, that's the kind of big draw that I'm looking for. Because, I know I'm definitely not the only one. And Kay, I know you specifically mentioned like the lore, the world building. That's what I'm the same way. That's really what draws me in. And so finding out about that, and the description reminded me a little bit. It's been a while since I read it, but it reminded me a little bit of in Gentlemen Bastards, the ancient like structures were, I think, were described as kind of like glassine,
like obsidian glass almost.
Yeah. And so like there, though, it's not nearly as much of a focus as it feels like it's going to be here. But again, I am a sucker for that trope. That is a trope that I don't know, something about like the ancient civilizations that were potentially more advanced than some, like, I don't know. I love that, whether it's fantasy, sci-fi. I'm just a big fan. So it was always going to be something that I was more interested in, but just, I feel like the biggest strength of the book for me is how well those things were set up, especially when you're trying to springboard onto a bigger series. There's just so many questions that I now want to know. And I think a lot of my favorite parts were there at the end, interacting with the shells and kind of talking there too. I did like, that it's acknowledged that Hadrian sounds like he's like a child or like really dumb when he's talking, because he doesn't speak the language all that well and things like that too. So a lot of my favorite stuff was toward the end, and just it's those bigger mysteries. I really want more of that lore. I really want to find out more of that. That's the big draw for me.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think for myself, it's kind of twofold, similar to Nico. I grew up with, watching Stargate. The concept of exploring other worlds, other first contact with other species, how humanity handles those interactions, to me is really fascinating. But even in our own world, I'm also fascinated about what we don't know. What didn't survive time? What haven't we discovered yet? That mystery is also fascinating to me, right? Libraries being burned in ancient times. What did we? There could have been Da Vinci's and other Socrates that we just have been lost to time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those mysteries within a fantastical world just fascinate me. I love being able to explore the what ifs of the world. And also, to me, I don't know if anyone else felt like this, and it is really well set up, but it felt a little bit like fishing, where the author's like, and give them a little bit and reel them in, and a little bit and reel them in. And they
A little bit.
Yeah.
yeah, so that little tidbit, a little foreshadowing, just wait.
That part was
it'll get
paced
better.
very well. Yeah.
Really, really enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah.
And then how it all kind of comes together when Hadrian is in the cave, and he has this interaction that only raises more questions about what's going on and why specifically him. And in those moments, it really makes me question the level of technologies as well, and how far the world will expand, right? Because we have these humans who have taken over how many stars, how many planets. They can travel, not quickly, but they travel through space. And their own people have different cultures on different planets. They have different ways of living, whether it's like up in the Palatines or in the peasants and the peasantry in the gutters. There's similarities, but also vastly like big differences between them. And how humanity handles that was also fascinating to me. I think too, what would be really interesting as well, because to me, I guess the best way to explain it is, yeah, they have all this cool technology, but why do we need to learn languages still? Why are we still learning language? That was my little pet peeve. We have all these travels, the technology that is available, but it's also still backwards in ways. It reminded me a little bit of Futurama, where they make those satire jokes about it's the year 3000, but they're still using floppy disks. Just great advancements in ways and de-evolution in other ways, or resorting to like bare minimum human function. There's another book that it reminds me of too in that regard, which is Red Mars, I think it is. It's a trilogy. Basically, these scientists take off to Mars to make a settlement because Earth is like kaput, the early ages of it, and how quickly humans devolve into just complete terrible attributes. Is kind of scary. So to see little elements of that still prevalent in those advanced versions of humanity is, really interesting. I'm really curious with where he's going to go. Also, I want I know it defeats the purpose, but I want a linguistic translator. Come on.
Well, I can't remember if it's in book one that he talks about just how much technology has been lost. It's been 10,000 years.
Yeah, especially with the country banning so much of it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and with the AI and like, you don't just have the Empire, you have the Normans
Mhm.
and their acceptance of, witchcraft, but not demons. And so they can do their own things. And so that means their technology is going to go off in a different branch than
Mhm.
just the necessity of administrative technology to run
Mm.
the Empire. And the genetics from that, right? So that's more
Right.
bio based technology. But yeah, I know he talks about
Yeah.
that, and that's what's so fascinating is that like when do you need linguistics would be more so between non-humans, right?
Yeah.
Who don't think anything like a
Yeah.
human.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious where it's going to go in terms of lore and those aspects and the censorship
Mhm.
that has a hold on the world. So yeah,
Mhm.
definitely really curious.
And I give a brief shout out to Madison, who was our reading buddy during the read along in May. Hi, Mads. How's it going? We've had a really good chat. So before I finish with my world building thoughts, I do want to tell everybody watching the replay or in the chat, please go down in the description box below us and check out the channels of the three lovely people outside my screen on the screen. And give them subscribes, check out their content. They're all amazing content creators, so you guys should do that. Andrew is also an author, so please go check out his Collation Saga series. If you're into Sun Eater and you like this kind of like big epic scope, focus on religion and political themes and linguistics and all of the check out his stuff. So there's so much about the world building, and it surprised me because as much of a character reader as I am, it was the world building that sold me on this series when I got to the end of book 1, which does not happen for me very often. I like the characters and I enjoyed my time with certain characters, but it was the world building that was immediately like that. I want more of that, which I think is a testament to Ruocchio's just imagination as an author, and how well he was able to articulate and create atmosphere around that mystery of the world building so well. And one of the scenes that really stuck out to me earlier on in the story was, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but the Umand creatures. There's that scene in the factory where Hadrian, the first one, where Hadrian sees, some abuse going on, and then later on with Gilliam. I'm glad we didn't have to talk about Gilliam on this stream. I didn't like him at all. Hadrian and I were totally in the same brain with that. But the whole scene with the abuse of the Umand and all of that kind of stuff, and the questions that raised about humanity's treatment of other sentient creatures and all of that kind of stuff, and how easily we can, how do I put this? See them as lesser than simply because they don't speak the way we do, they don't operate, their culture is different than ours, that kind of stuff. And I couldn't stop thinking when we're talking about the Quiet and their structures, it's so similar to me of how we are about the ancient Egyptians and their pyramids in some ways. Like, we still have the world's brightest architects in 2025 looking at the pyramids and going, yeah, but how'd they do that? And they have all these theories and all this stuff. And I think there's so many things about ancient world civilizations that we cannot explain and we do not have the answers for. And I like that he's kind of exploding that out to a galactic level in this story, because I'm also totally with Unico on give me ancient civilizations and discovering them and all the little bits and pieces. And I love that. I love that trope in storytelling. And I think Ruocchio is setting it up in a way that promises to deliver some pretty epic reveals in the future. So, yeah, I'm excited about that. Daniel says, I've always wondered if an alien intelligence would be so different from ours that we wouldn't be able to understand each other at all, or potentially even recognize each other as being intelligent. Yeah.
Possible.
I mean, if you think about it, he does delve into that with the Cielson and, the way that the general human population looks at them as they're killers, they'll eat people, they're immediately, this is what we are going to assign to them, despite the fact that we like never talked to them or have ever had any like real interactions with them. So yeah, I think he's exploring a lot of really interesting themes through the world building, and I think the world building and the themes are so interconnected at this point that really excites me a lot moving forward in the series. So yeah,
Themes
and world building,
also answered the
exciting
pyramid
story.
thing.
Wait, what? Nico, what'd you say?
So I was just making a joke that Stargate also answers the pyramid thing, though. So
Yeah.
Okay, so I need to watch Stargate instead of reading Sun Eater, is what I'm hearing, right?
Both.
I can do both.
Yeah.
To Daniel's comment, Star Trek also addresses that concept as well, in a few different ways, where the life form is just completely unrecognizable.
Yeah, which is, again, I appreciate authors that are able to differentiate very clearly between races of, human versus non-human. The other thing I wanted to mention when it comes to world building is I thought Ruocchio did a fantastic job in this first book of, there wasn't like info dump feeling in this book. And I think the way he got around that was actually pretty brilliant, because he creates a character who is a very curious, I want to learn things, I want to study all of these different cultures and ancient history and all of this stuff. It feels very natural, because as Hadrian is excitedly digging into all of these things and reflecting on all of these things, it doesn't feel like Ruocchio's just dumping a bunch of world building and lore at us. He's allowing us to explore it authentically with the character, and it fits within Hadrian's personality perfectly, which is a really good way to do that.
Yeah.
So kudos for that, because I thought that was really brilliant.
And I feel like he never prose dumped either.
No.
Yeah.
Like even when he goes into prose, it's never purple, and but it also never feels. I mean, it's different when he goes prosy, but it's not separate from when he's normally just narrating. So it has a really good ebb and flow when he goes in and out of his prose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Elson side of the story is so powerful in terms. Yeah. That's what I'm expecting, honestly, moving forward in the series, is a lot more of that. For sure. Well, does anybody else have any final thoughts before we end? I know we've been going for 2 hours, which is kind of what I thought. There's a lot to get through. So I'm actually quite impressed we managed that in just over 2 hours. We did a good job, guys.
I did also like the fact that, because you're getting it from Hadrian's point of view and he is telling you this story, the reality that he may have an agenda, and that you may not be able to trust everything that you're getting from him, especially when he's maybe doing questionable things and giving you excuses for it.
Yeah.
I like that. I like unreliable narrators.
I had a comment on my review video about that was like, what do you mean? He's not unreliable. And they were pretty upset that I said he was potentially unreliable.
Might be.
That's the point of first-person narrative.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
He can control
any
what
first-person narrative is unreliable. Like,
yeah.
He admits it often. I mean, when he'll say, I know that you don't think this matters, but I want to remember these people for who they were. And then he kills them. But and then other times he'll say he'll gloss over a huge event that you've read the history, you know what happens in this battle. What's more important is I had coffee with the guy the next day, so let's talk about the coffee I had.
Yeah, he has full control of telling the vision he wants us to see. So to me, he's unreliable.
Kind of makes you wonder if he's trying to piss off somebody at the end who's telling him to write a particular narrative. He's like, I'm gonna tell my part, because what are you gonna do? Write it over?
I mean, that I love when authors do that. Going back, since we mentioned him earlier on in the stream, Erickson with Malazan, somebody was like, you can't stick with a single character longer than a couple of chapters or whatever. Book 4, the beginning of book 4, he's like, bet. And we get one character for like ages in book 4. So
and I was so mad.
Fair. That's fair. But yeah, I love when authors are like, watch me. I know what I'm doing. So yeah, are there any other final thoughts? Feel free. Okay. To everyone watching the replay, we appreciate you. Thank you for joining us. To everyone in the chat, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts. Thank you for all of your likes, dislikes, and all of your commentary throughout the chat. You guys are awesome. And huge thank you to the 4 lovely people who joined me on screen this evening to chat. This is my favorite part about what we do on BookTube, and I think it's such an important part of, since we're talking about all the humanity themes here, discussing books, and it is an incredibly important human connection experience, and I love that we get to do this, and I love all the different perspectives. So I appreciate you guys taking time out of your evening to come and join me to talk about Sun Eater.
Thank you for hosting and having us.
Absolutely. So we will be, at least some of us, will be reading Howling Dark, and there will be another discussion on that in the future. So stay tuned for that. Is everyone, well, besides Andrew, because we already know he already has, Kay and Nico, are you guys planning on continuing?
Yes.
I started, actually, I started back up today. So.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Perfect timing. Yeah, I'm halfway through Howling Dark, and I think you're getting close.
I'm less than halfway.
Yeah, you're getting close to me, though.
Mm.
So we will definitely.
I'm pretty early.
It was hard to compartmentalize between. I was like, I need to like make sure I'm staying in book 1 here.
Yeah.
So anyways, thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope you are all having a fantastic week. I hope whatever you're reading, it's a 5-star read, and we'll see you.